what are you hearing so far at these summits that potentially could inform or shape your legislative agenda for the next legislative session?
Well, first and foremost is the need to make sure that our education systems, and we heard today even in the elementary grades, but certainly through high school and post-secondary, and especially the technical community colleges and their training programs with the jobs that are available. And I've heard elsewhere in Minnesota, as I heard today, that their employers looking for people with specific skills. There are a lot of people who are out of work looking for jobs, and there's a disconnect there. So that's something that isn't going to require more money. It's just first and foremost a reorientation of the training with the jobs of the future. And access to capital for small businesses, a more streamlined regulatory process, which the legislature in a bipartisan way and I have initiated in the last legislative session. We need to continue that so that we can, as we said here today, get out of the way so businesses can expand and create more jobs.
Governor, did you learn anything new today here in St. Cloud that you hadn't heard at any of your previous summits that you've held around the state?
I think the themes were the same, but the specifics in terms of the job opportunities, certainly with the type of manufacturing here. The healthcare, of course, is a growing area elsewhere. But this is an area with great strengths and with growing employment. It has been for the last decades. And as it was said, making a transition from manufacturing to more of the healthcare and education and other business services. So, there's that need to make sure that we're focused at the future rather than the remnants of the past.
Did it surprise you how often the recurring theme of the airport kept coming up, that it was such an important priority to the folks here in St. Cloud?
Well, I felt a couple of decades ago when the management of Northwest and Iowa State Auditor took the airline in the wrong direction by privatizing the ownership and incurring this enormous debt that over time Northwest would be hampered and ultimately fall victim to takeover as it did last year. And but the consequences of losing a headquarters company is something that has ripple effects that are mostly negative for the years following. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but that prophecy has turned out to be true, and one of the results of that has been a deterioration in regional service, and I agree with those here today who said that St. Cloud doesn't need a link to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. It needs direct connections to Chicago and Detroit and elsewhere on both the east and west coast. So I will work with the mayor and the airport authority and others to go to whatever airline companies are possibly interested in that. We need more competition. We need to give Delta competition in the state so that they are more responsive and that others come in and fill those gaps. And I'll definitely make that a priority, even more so after our discussion today.
Governor, can I ask a question about the Viking Stadium issue? Since that's
no one has any interest in
that. I spoke to a couple lawmakers from Central Minnesota yesterday who expressed a willingness to take a look at expanded gaming as a possibility for funding that stadium. Is that something you would take a look at? I mean, I know you mentioned it today when you got the question from the Ramsey County resident. Is that something you see as a potential, building block for this stadium deal coming together?
I think we should take a look at everything over the next 5 weeks. Turn all the cards face up on the table. What the financial needs are, what the additional cost factors might be, what the trade-offs are of the site in Arden Hills versus a couple of possibilities in the Minneapolis area, what the financing options are, one site versus another, where that money could come from, including gaming, including sales tax, and there's support and opposition for every one of those. And also seeing if there is a majority in the legislature on both sides of the aisle, both the House and the Senate, that see in the public interest there's a package that they can be for. It may not be for everything, and everybody would rather talk about what they're against, but if that's the consensus, then we'll have to tell the Vikings no new stadium and accept the consequences. I don't think that's in the best interest of Minnesota, but I don't have this decision to make alone, and nor should I. So this is the time for all these different points of view and all these different ideas and suggestions and strategies to come forward and have a public vetting of them, and that's what legislative hearings are supposed to do and can do if the legislative leadership is agreeable to my recommendation that we have a special session in the latter part of November, but we need a deadline. We need to get this resolved one way or the other. People need to know they're going to have to vote, and they're going to be held accountable for those votes, and that's why they were elected to represent the will of the people of Minnesota.
What's the purpose or the rationale for setting the deadline on November 23rd? I know the state's November forecast is set to come out about a week after that. Some folks think that's going to show more budget issues ahead for the state. Is there a desire maybe to get this issue resolved before that next budget forecast comes out? Or?
Well, you get it resolved before the holidays. My experience from Thanksgiving to the New Year's is a time when it's very hard to get public policy issues addressed unless there's just true emergencies, and then you lead into the next legislative session, and the decisions, especially controversial ones, are not made by legislative bodies, in my experience, until the end of the session, which means you're talking about the end of April, even into May. So you're really talking about a difference between 5 and 6 months in making a decision in November versus in May. And so, you know, now to me is the time the lease expires, the Vikings lease the Metrodome at the end of this year. So, you know, it's really not related to the revenue forecast, because there aren't going to be any general fund revenues involved in financing this stadium, state revenues, and I've made that very clear, and the legislative leadership supports that. I think the legislature overwhelmingly supports that, and people in Minnesota oppose general fund revenue dollars going into the stadium, so it just isn't going to happen. So, you know, the reason to get this resolved is so we can give a definitive answer to the Vikings one way or the other, and to the National Football League, whose representatives are here today, who want to know, because there are all these other pieces of other teams that are possibly candidates to go to Los Angeles or other locations where they want a team, and we just need to get this resolved. I got that message very clearly from Commissioner Goodell. So you know, now's the time to act, or decide we're not going to act and accept the consequences.
With so many elements on the table, the state, the county, the team, everybody involved, not to mention the money, how confident are you that's going to come together in 5 weeks?
Well, I'm confident that we'll get a resolution, one way or the other. You know, again, it's a collective decision to make. I believe we can put together a financing package if the Vikings are willing to commit absolutely to pay for the costs, overrun and Arden Hills. I believe we can put together a good financial package in Minneapolis, and I think we can have a premier stadium either site that will involve thousands of construction jobs for the next few years to clear the site and build it. And they'll have an operating revenues that will benefit the state. And the real solution to the deficit problems of the state is to have more people working, as well as to have a progressive income tax structure. So this is one of the economic development projects that's going to put people to work and add to state revenues, as well as to the overall health of our economy. I believe that can be done. I'm willing to roll my sleeves in the next 5 weeks and work with others who are responsible for those decisions, and do my utmost to put it together. But ultimately, if the consensus or majority view of the legislators is to you know, not go ahead, then we'll have to live with that. And you know, well, I'm prepared to do that too. But I'm confident we'll get a resolution. I'm hopeful we'll get a positive result to move ahead. But either way, at least we'll resolve it and then move on.
You met with the Republican leaders yesterday. Did you get a sense from them that they're willing to go into a special session in November to talk about this issue?
Well, I met with both Republican and DFL legislative leaders, and you know, they wanted to talk with their caucuses, and we'll see. I'm hopeful. I urge that we set aside 2012 election politics and 2014 election politics and focus on what's best for the people of Minnesota and for our economic future. You know, we can have honest differences of view on that. I hope there's a willingness to collaborate and work together and try to put this together. If not, as I say, then you know, the opportunity will be lost, and we'll move ahead. But they will then be accountable, as I'm accountable, for the decision and the outcome and the consequences that result from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Governor.